The back road wound through the cottonwoods like a ribbon of forgotten promises, its gravel crunching softly beneath the tires of Cassian Wolf's old Chevy pickup. It was October in the ridge country, and the golden light filtering through the leaves painted the world in a warm, flickering glow. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine, and a faint folk song hummed from the radio, barely audible over the engine's low rumble. Cassian drove slowly, one hand on the wheel, the other cradling a paper cup of lukewarm black coffee. Beside him, his 6-year-old daughter, Rowan, pressed her nose to the window, her blonde pigtails bouncing as she pointed at the trees. "They look like they're whispering, Daddy," she said, her voice bright with wonder. Cassian glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Maybe they are, sweetheart." He didn't take this road often. The highway was faster, straighter, with fewer curves to remind him of things he'd rather forget. But today, something had pulled him here, maybe the light, maybe Rowan's curiosity, maybe just the need for something to change. Then everything shattered. A small figure darted into the road, a boy, barefoot, wide-eyed, his face streaked with dirt and something red that might have been blood. Cassian slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded violently, gravel spraying like shrapnel as the vehicle lurched sideways. Coffee splashed across his flannel shirt, but he barely noticed. Heart pounding, he yanked the gear into park and threw open the door. The boy didn't move. He stood frozen in the middle of the road, trembling, his small hand pointing toward the tree line. Cassian's gaze followed, and there, at the edge of a shallow ditch, half hidden beneath a blanket of fallen leaves, lay a woman. "Rowan, stay in the truck," Cassian barked, his voice sharper than he intended. He ran, his boots slipping on the loose soil as he scrambled down the slope, knees hitting the ground hard beside her. She was crumpled on her side, like a discarded rag doll, her blonde hair matted with mud, her clothes torn and damp. A thin trail of blood curved from her temple to her jawline, stark against her pale skin. Her lips were parted, her chest barely rising. "Ma'am," Cassian said, voice urgent. "Can you hear me?" No response. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck, her pulse was weak, but there. He looked back at the boy, still standing in the road, still pointing, his expression numb, as if he'd stopped hoping help would come. Cassian had seen that look before, in his own reflection, the day he lost his son. "Okay," he breathed, forcing calm into his voice. "Okay, I've got you." He sprinted back to the truck, grabbing what he had, an old wool blanket, a roll of duct tape, a length of fishing line, a bottle of hand sanitizer, and a stained rag he used for wiping down tools. Not ideal, but he'd saved lives with less. Kneeling beside her again, he wrapped the blanket around her, careful not to move her neck. Her arm was clearly dislocated, her shoulders sat at an unnatural angle. Using the duct tape and fishing line, he fashioned a makeshift brace, securing her arm against her side. He poured the sanitizer on the rag and gently dabbed at her wounds, muttering apologies for the sting he knew she couldn't hear. When she moaned softly, a faint sound of life, Cassian exhaled. "She's breathing," he said, glancing at the boy, who had crept closer, his bare feet silent on the leaves. "What's your name?" The boy blinked, his voice a whisper. "Odden." "Odden," Cassian repeated, committing it to memory. "I'm Cassian. I'm going to take you both somewhere safe." Odden nodded, and for the first time, he reached out, clutching Cassian's hand with a grip that was both fragile and fierce. The woman was light, too light, malnourished. Cassian lifted her into his arms, her body shivering despite the blanket, and climbed back up the ditch. He laid her gently in the back seat of the truck, adjusting the seatbelt to rest softly against her shoulder. Then he opened the passenger door for Odden, who climbed in silently, folding his arms protectively across his chest. As Cassian drove, the sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows across the road. He didn't call 911 not because he didn't trust them, but because something in his gut told him to wait. She looked like the kind of woman who'd already been failed by the system too many times. His small cedar-framed cabin came into view, tucked against the edge of the forest, its porch swing still, its chimney smokeless. He parked, hurried to open the front door, and carried the woman inside. Rowan, who had been home with a neighbor watching her after school, ran to the door when she heard the truck. "Daddy," she called, her eyes wide. "Who's that lady?" "Someone who needs our help, sweetheart," Cassian said. "Can you bring me the big pillow from the couch?" Rowan nodded and darted off, her pigtails bouncing. Cassian laid the woman on the sofa, propping her head gently on the pillow. Odden stood close, his hands clenched into fists. "Is she going to die?" he whispered. "No," Cassian said, his voice steady with a conviction he hadn't known he still had. "Not tonight." Chapter 2, A Stranger in the Quiet. When Aloan Hart opened her eyes, the world was no longer spinning. It was quiet, too quiet. No sirens, no slamming doors, no sharp voices accusing her of lies. Just the soft creak of wood and the low hum of wind brushing against the window panes like fingertips on glass. She tried to sit up, but pain flared across her ribs and left shoulder, a deep, hollow ache throbbing in her head. She winced, turning her face slightly, and caught the scent of wood smoke, bacon grease, and cinnamon. The blanket wrapped around her was heavy, like an embrace meant to keep her here. She didn't trust it. Her eyes scanned the room. Not a hospital, not a shelter, a cabin. The walls were paneled with dark stained wood, the kind you didn't see in sterile places. Books lined the far wall, real books, not torn paperbacks. A fire crackled in the hearth. A coat rack held a flannel shirt too big for most men she'd known. She wasn't alone. A man sat across the room in a rocking chair, tall and broad-shouldered, quiet as stone. He held a half mug of coffee in one hand, the other resting loosely on his thigh. His jeans were faded, his boots dusty, and he hadn't shaved in days. His eyes met hers the moment she stirred. He didn't speak right away. Neither did she. After a long silence, he set the mug down and stood, moving with purpose but not force, like someone used to handling fragile things. "Good," he said in a low, reassuring voice. "You're awake." Aloan licked her cracked lips. "Where's my son?" she asked, panic flickering behind her eyes. "He's fine," the man said, walking to the hallway. "Sleeping like a log. My daughter tucked him in." Aloan's breath caught. She pushed herself up too quickly, and pain punched through her side. She gasped, clutching her ribs. "Careful," the man said, moving closer. "You've got at least 2 bruised ribs and a dislocated shoulder." "I didn't have a splint, so I made do." Aloan looked down and blinked. Her arm was secured neatly, if unconventionally, with fishing line, a shelf board, and duct tape. "You, what?" "I'm Cassian Wolf," he added, his voice calm. "You and your son were on the side of the road. He flagged me down." The memory hit her like a fist, Odden, the road, the pain, the way she'd prayed for once without asking for anything, only that her son might be spared. Her voice cracked. "How long have I been here?" "Just over a day." She looked at him sharply. "You should have taken me to a hospital." "I would have," he said, "but I figured if you wanted police or doctors, you'd have asked for them by now." Her heart pounded. He knew, or at least suspected. "And I didn't want to risk them taking the boy," he added quietly. Aloan stared at him. No one had ever thought like that, not in years, not since her husband died and the world flipped on its axis. No judge had seen a mother worth saving. No officer had asked how the bruises got there. No neighbor had knocked on her door. But this stranger did. Her lip trembled before she pressed it into a thin line. Cassian stepped back, giving her space. He walked to the kitchen and poured a cup of water. "You should drink something." He handed it to her. She took it with shaking fingers, her eyes darting around the room, always returning to the bookshelf. The titles ranged from Steinbeck to weathered National Geographics to a children's book with a ripped spine. "Are we in the woods?" she asked. "Technically, yeah. Closest town's 15 miles down the ridge. This cabin's mine. Built it myself." He paused, then added, "Well, me and my late wife." Aloan froze. "I'm sorry." "Thanks," he said, then added, "It's been 5 years." She glanced at the fire. "Feels like more than a day's gone by." "Time's funny out here," he replied. "Sometimes it slows down. Sometimes it helps you breathe again." She didn't answer that. She couldn't. Small footsteps pattered from the hallway. A little girl appeared, her hair a tangle of blonde curls, dragging a faded stuffed fox. "Daddy," she whispered, "is she the lady?" Cassian nodded. "Come say hello, Rowan." The girl crept closer. "Hi, I'm 6. Are you the boy's mom?" Aloan blinked, then gave her a faint smile. "Yes. My name's Aloan." "Your boy fixed my flashlight all by himself, did he?" Rowan nodded solemnly, then whispered, "He's kind of like magic." Cassian chuckled low in his chest. "You're not wrong." Rowan tiptoed forward and placed the stuffed fox next to Aloan's pillow. "You can borrow him until you feel better. His name's Kip." Then she was gone. Aloan stared at the fox, then at Cassian, her voice dropping. "Why are you doing this?" He met her eyes, unwavering. "Because once, someone stopped for me when they didn't have to. And because that boy of yours looked at me like maybe I could still be good." A knot formed in her throat. She looked away so he wouldn't see her tears. But he did. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel judged for it. Chapter 3: The Weight of Survival. Cassian stood on the porch the next morning, watching the sun spill over the ridge like melted gold. It had rained softly before dawn, leaving the earth damp and fragrant. His hands were still dusty with flour from kneading dough, his grandmother's recipe, barely legible on an old index card Rowan had once tried to color with crayons. Inside, the cabin was quiet. He stepped back through the door, wiping his hands on a towel. The scent of yeast and cinnamon drifted through the air, mingling with pine and ash from the low fire. Aloan was sitting up now, not fully, but enough to reach the water on the nightstand without wincing too hard. Progress. She looked less pale, a bit of pink returning to her cheeks. She'd combed her hair back with trembling fingers, revealing a bruised beauty in her restraint, the way she moved like someone expecting pain to follow any moment of comfort. "Morning," he said, voice soft so as not to startle her. She nodded. "It smells like a bakery in here." "I bake on Sundays," he replied, though it was Tuesday. "Helps the place feel less hollow." She didn't ask what he meant. Instead, her eyes drifted to the kitchen, where Rowan sat on a stool, watching a bowl of rising dough like it might perform magic. Cassian placed a wooden tray in front of Aloan, a plate of warm scrambled eggs, toast with wild blueberry jam, and sliced apples dusted with cinnamon. She looked at the tray, then at him. "You didn't have to do all this." "I know," he said simply. "But I did." She hesitated before picking up the fork, her movements delicate, like someone trying not to break something invisible. "After a few bites," she said, "Odden tells me your daughter has a whole box of art supplies." "She does," Cassian chuckled. "She draws on everything she's not supposed to. Last week, I found a mural of a dragon inside my toolbox lid." Aloan smiled faintly, a softness that suited her. "You're good with kids." He shrugged. "Most days. Some days, I'm just a guy trying to make it to bedtime without stepping on a Lego barefoot." She laughed, quiet but real. Odden came in then, holding a broken flashlight in one hand, Rowan's stuffed fox under his arm. "I fixed it," he announced, flicking on the beam to prove it. Cassian raised an eyebrow. "How?" "Wires were loose," Odden said. "I used one from the radio." "You're 7, right?" "Almost 8. Cassian exchanged a look with Aloan, who gave a small, almost apologetic shake of her head. "He's always been like that," she said. "Takes things apart, puts them back together better than they were." Cassian crouched beside Odden. "Remind me not to let you near the truck engine." "I could make it faster," Odden replied, dead serious. Cassian grinned. "That's what I'm afraid of." Later that day, after Rowan had gone to school with the neighbor and Odden had settled with a pile of books from Cassian's shelf, Aloan asked for help getting to the porch. "I want air," she said. "And sun." He brought her a light shawl and helped her walk the few steps from the sofa to the rocking chair outside. Her grip on his forearm was tight, her jaw clenched against the pain, but she didn't complain. Once seated, she leaned back and exhaled, like someone surfacing from deep water. The forest spread out before them, rustling and golden, birds chattering overhead like old friends. You live here year-round? She asked. Yeah, Cassian said, tilting his head toward the cabin. With Rowan. She was quiet a moment. I used to be afraid of silence after my husband died. It was like the quiet screamed at me. I filled the house with noise, TV, music, anything, so I wouldn't have to hear myself think. He nodded, not pressing. Funny, she said, voice softer now. I'm not afraid of it here. Cassian didn't reply. Sometimes the deepest connection came from sharing the same silence. That evening, while chopping vegetables for stew, Aloan asked from the couch, "Do you ever get tired?" He looked up. Of what? Carrying all of this, she said, gesturing to the cabin, to Rowan, to the space between them. Holding things together. He paused, knife hovering over a carrot. Every day. She blinked, surprised at his honesty. But then Rowan laughs, he added. Or I see the firelight hit a page just right while I'm reading. Or a stranger wakes up on my couch and reminds me I still know how to give a damn. Aloan stared at him, something fragile flickering in her eyes, admiration, awe, grief, all three. She looked down at her lap. My in-laws said I was unfit. That I was soft, dramatic, unstable. They threatened custody. Then one night, I didn't lock the bedroom door fast enough. Cassian's hand froze on the cutting board. Odden saw everything, she whispered. I grabbed him, ran into the dark, and never looked back. He put the knife down, quietly, respectfully. You didn't just run, he said. You survived. She nodded slowly, tears tracking down her cheeks. Barely. He stepped forward and handed her a clean dish towel. She took it like it was something sacred. That night, after the children were asleep, Cassian sat on the porch alone. A storm was forming on the horizon, the air heavy, humming. Inside, Aloan rested, her breathing deeper, untroubled. He looked up at the sky, then closed his eyes. He didn't know what was coming next, but for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid of it. Chapter 4, The Boy with Gears in His Hands. Cassian had lived in the woods long enough to know when something didn't belong. It wasn't the mother this time, it was the boy. Odden wasn't just bright, he was different. Cassian had seen precocious kids before. Rowan had taught herself to read road signs at 4, but this boy had gears in his fingers and equations in his eyes, and he wasn't trying to impress anyone. The old cuckoo clock had sat on Cassian's workshop shelf for years. His late wife, Belle, had found it at a flea market in Vermont, insisting it was charming, even though it hadn't ticked since the Clinton administration. Cassian had meant to throw it out but couldn't bring himself to. That morning, when he walked into the garage to grab his tool bag, Odden was already there, balanced on a milk crate, hands elbow deep in brass and rust. The kid hadn't asked permission, he'd simply opened the back, laid the parts out like a surgeon, and started working. Cassian stood at the door, arms crossed, watching. Need a hand? Odden barely looked up. No, thank you. You know what you're doing? I read a book on pendulum timing, Odden replied, as casually as if he were talking about baseball. The problem's in the escapement wheel. Cassian blinked. What's your last name, Odden? The boy paused, his fingers slowing. Hart. Cassian nodded, noting the hesitation. You hungry? Odden looked up, his blue eyes piercing. Starving. Cassian smiled. Let's fix that first. Over breakfast, Aloan sat with her hair damp from the morning wash, wrapped loosely in a towel. Her bruises had yellowed at the edges, softening into something survivable. She looked stronger, though her movements still held the caution of someone waiting for the world to hit her again. Cassian poured her coffee. Your son fixed my clock. Aloan raised an eyebrow. Of course he did. Do you homeschool him? She paused. We did for a while. My husband, he was brilliant, a design engineer with a mind like an engine. But when he died, everything shifted. What about school after that? Aloan looked down. I tried public school in the city. They said Odden was disruptive because he kept correcting the teacher. Said he lacked social cohesion. Cassian snorted. That's a fancy way of saying he's smarter than they're comfortable with. He started building things out of scrap, she said. I woke up once and found he'd rewired the hallway light with a motion sensor. I asked how he knew how to do it. He said he just listened. Cassian watched the boy, now sitting cross-legged with Rowan on the rug, building a solar system out of nuts, bolts, and buttons from a jar. Each planet was scaled, orbiting on threads suspended from chopsticks. Rowan giggled as her moon swung into Saturn. I've never met a kid like him, Cassian murmured. You and me both, Aloan said softly. That afternoon, Rowan insisted on teaching Odden how to climb trees. They wandered into the backyard, a patch of soft dirt and old oaks that had once held a swing set before time and storms took their toll. Cassian followed at a distance, splitting wood with his axe, one eye always on the children. At first, Odden refused to climb. I don't like heights, he said. Rowan told him, you don't have to go high, just far enough to see the leaves move from the inside. That did it. By the time Cassian wiped the sweat from his brow, Odden was halfway up the first branch, arms stiff but determined, Rowan cheering below like she was announcing the Super Bowl. When he jumped down, laughing, Cassian saw Aloan on the porch, watching her son with a look that broke his heart a little, a mother seeing her child finally allowed to be a child again. Chapter 5, The Storm Within. Cassian smelled the storm before he saw it. In the ridge country, storms didn't announce themselves with thunder, they came with a heaviness in the air, a tension that settled between your shoulder blades. The trees grew still, the birds silent, as if the forest was holding its breath. He stepped outside just before dusk, a hand on the porch post, watching the clouds roll in over the mountains, charcoal gray, thick as regret. The scent of rain hit the back of his throat like metal and memory. Inside, Aloan was folding blankets while Rowan and Odden put away books and toys. The children had become inseparable, Rowan's spark and Odden's quiet balancing each other like stars in gravity. You expecting something bad? Aloan asked, noticing the way Cassian lingered near the door. Lightning, he murmured. And wind. Probably quick but strong. Should we head to town? He shook his head. We're safer here than on the roads. Aloan nodded, though she gripped the back of the chair a little tighter. By the time the first drops hit, the wind had bent the treetops. The rain came sideways, tapping hard against the windows in irregular rhythms, as if the sky was trying to shake something loose. Odden watched the glass like it was alive. Rowan huddled on the floor with Kip, her stuffed fox. Cassian moved quickly but calmly, rolling towels against the doors, lighting emergency lanterns, pulling firewood inside. Aloan, despite her bad shoulder, followed his lead, handing him tools, checking on the kids, closing curtains. But when the power snapped off with a loud click and the cabin went black, she froze. Cassian turned just in time to see her brace herself against the wall, eyes squeezed shut, her breath shallow. Aloan, he asked softly. She didn't answer. He moved closer, not touching her, just close enough for his voice to ground her. You're safe. We've got light. I've got a generator if we need it. You're not alone in this storm. Her jaw trembled. It's not the dark, she whispered. What is it? Being trapped, she said. When I was with them, if I made a mistake, they'd lock me in the pantry. No windows, no clocks. I never knew how long they'd leave me there. Cassian's chest tightened. You're not in that house anymore, he said gently. You're in mine. And in my house, no one gets locked in anywhere. She looked at him, eyes wide and wet. The candlelight flickered across her cheekbones, illuminating the bruises that hadn't yet faded. But there was strength behind the fear now, and Cassian knew she was still fighting. The storm howled louder. A loud crash echoed through the cabin, something outside had come down hard. Cassian swore under his breath and grabbed his raincoat. Stay with the kids. I'll check it. No, Aloan said, standing straighter. Let me. He stared at her, startled. You've done everything, she said. You shouldn't always be the one saving everyone. Just tell me what to look for. He saw the fire in her now, a woman reclaiming her right to stand upright. But before he could respond, Rowan screamed. Cassian spun around. Odden was gone. The door was open. He was out the door before he knew it, heart slamming against his ribs. The wind tore at his coat, rain blinding him, but through the chaos, he heard a small voice calling out. "Mom, I dropped it." Cassian followed the voice down the slope toward the creek bed. The old swing he'd meant to burn last fall had come loose, lodging against a maple tree. Beneath it, in the mud and branches, was Odden, kneeling, soaked, clutching something in his hand. Cassian waded through the muck and reached him. "Are you hurt?" Odden shook his head, teeth chattering. "I dropped Rowan's fox. She was scared. I didn't want her to lose it." Cassian looked down. In the boy's mud-caked hand was Kip, soaking wet but intact. A lump rose in Cassian's throat. He crouched and pulled Odden into his arms. "You're a good brother," he said, voice rough. "I'm not her brother," Odden whispered. "You are," Cassian said, holding him tighter. "In every way that counts." Back at the cabin, Aloan met them at the door with a towel and shaking hands. When she saw what Odden held, she choked on a sob. Cassian helped her sit, then stripped off Odden's wet clothes, wrapping him in a blanket. He turned back toward the window. The storm was fading, the trees standing like soldiers in the fading light. The silence that followed was almost reverent. Later, after the children had fallen asleep on a shared cot by the fireplace, Aloan sat next to Cassian in the rocking chair, her injured shoulder wrapped but still aching. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For not locking the door. For being the man my son ran toward, not away from." Cassian didn't reply right away. He looked at the sleeping children, their hands tangled together. "I lost a boy once," he said finally. 5 years ago. He was 3. Leukemia. We tried everything. Nothing worked." Aloan's breath caught. "I left the world after that, quit my job, sold the house, moved here with Rowan, built this place with my hands so I could remember what it felt like to build anything at all." She looked at him differently then, not with pity, but with recognition, shared survival. The storm outside was gone, but inside, something had begun, not a romance, not yet, but a warmth, a fire stoked slowly by two people who knew how to lose everything and still keep going. Chapter 6: The Envelope. Cassian stood in the dim glow of the kitchen lantern, the storm now a wet whisper behind the cabin walls. His boots left faint marks on the wood floor, trailing mud and memory. He leaned against the counter, staring at the envelope he'd pulled from the old tin box again, Martian Industries, confidential. He hadn't meant to find it tonight, hadn't planned on opening any ghosts. But when Aloan whispered the name Edward Marchand, something ancient and unfinished had shifted inside him. The paper was thick, embossed. He remembered the courier who delivered it, dressed in a suit, driving a car that didn't belong in the mountains. It had arrived the morning after Caleb's funeral, when everything still smelled like lilies and sterile grief. He hadn't opened it, not out of anger, but numbness. Nothing, not even a billionaire's offer, could matter when your child wasn't breathing. The next morning, Aloan found the letter on the kitchen table. Cassian had taken Rowan to school and gone to pick up propane from town. The cabin was still, but not silent. Odden sat on the rug, flipping through a dog-eared copy of The Time Machine. The fire crackled behind him, its rhythm familiar now. Aloan touched the edge of the envelope. She wasn't going to pry, not after years of locked doors and hidden bank statements, but the paper's careful folds, its weight, made her pause. Then she saw the name again, Edward Marchand. Her breath caught. She moved to the sink, gripping the edge hard. Could it be coincidence, fate, or the cruel habit of life to circle back just when you dared to breathe again? That afternoon, Cassian returned, his face flushed from the wind, carrying groceries in one arm and a new scarf for Rowan in the other, still wrapped in tissue. He paused when he saw Aloan in the kitchen, the envelope on the table between them like a third presence. "You opened it?" he asked, not angry, just surprised. "I didn't read it," she said quietly. "I saw the name. That was enough." Cassian set down the bag slowly. "So, it's real. The name Martian means something to you." She nodded. "My husband, his name was Julian Marchand, son of Edward." He died in a car accident 3 years ago. Or, they said it was an accident. But nothing after that felt accidental. He waited. They blamed me, she went on. His family said I'd seduced Julian for his money, that I was never good enough, that Odden wasn't even really his. She looked up at him. But he was. Every inch of him. Cassian sat across from her. They tried to buy me off after the funeral, offered a settlement if I signed away custody. When I refused, they changed tactics, legal pressure, rumors, surveillance. She swallowed hard. One night, I found a wiretap in my car. That same week, someone smashed my front window. After that, I took Odden and ran. She didn't cry, her voice steady, but her hands in her lap were shaking. Cassian leaned forward. You think Edward was behind all that? I don't know, she said. Julian always said his father didn't trust anyone, not even him. But after the funeral, Edward disappeared from my life, from everyone's. No press, no public appearances. It was like he vanished. Cassian exhaled slowly. I got that letter the day after I buried my son, he said. I never opened it. I thought, what could a billionaire possibly say that would mean anything to me? She looked at him with something between pity and awe. You lost a son, too. He nodded. Caleb. Cancer. He was 3. I still hear him in the quiet sometimes. She didn't speak for a long time, then said gently, maybe that's why Odden ran to your truck that day. Maybe he saw something in you I couldn't yet. That evening, while Odden and Rowan built a blanket fort and argued about Saturn's rings, Aloan stepped onto the porch. Cassian followed, coffee in hand. The wind had stilled, the trees dripping quietly in the sunset. I've been thinking, she said. Maybe it's time to stop running. Cassian raised an eyebrow. I'm tired, she confessed, of being hunted, of watching Odden check the locks twice before bed, of teaching him to disappear instead of speak up. He sipped his coffee. And what would you do instead? She hesitated. I want to go to the courthouse, she said finally. I want to face it, the accusations, the lies. I want to tell the truth before someone else writes the story for me. That takes guts. I don't know if I have them yet. You do, he said. She looked at him, something unreadable in her expression. Cassian, if I go and they find us and take Odden. He cut her off gently. They won't. How can you be sure? He stared out at the trees. Because I've seen what it does to a child to grow up thinking they're unworthy of love. And I'd burn down every courthouse in this state before I let that happen again. Aloan exhaled, something between a sob and a laugh. You always this dramatic? Only when it matters. That night, after the children were asleep under a sky of quiet stars, Aloan found Cassian at the kitchen table, the envelope back in his hands. This time, he opened it. Inside was a letter in careful, slanted script. Mr. Wolf, my name is Edward Marchand. You don't know me, but I have followed your story. You don't owe me anything, but I feel I owe you something. There are times in life when we fail the people we love, when we let power and fear speak louder than decency. I failed my son. I failed my grandson. And I fear I may be failing you. If you are reading this, know that I have watched you from a distance, not as a man of wealth, but as a man who once believed in redemption. You have not disappeared. You have not crumbled. You have survived, and in that, there is something I may need to ask of you. Cassian stopped reading. He looked at Aloan, whose eyes had filled with tears she hadn't permitted to fall. He knew, she whispered. Cassian nodded. And he's coming. Chapter 7, The Man in the Rolls-Royce. It was Rowan who saw the car first. She was coloring on the porch, a pink crayon in one hand, Kip cradled in the other, when the low hum of tires on gravel made her pause. Daddy, she said, there's a ghost car in the trees. Cassian set down his mug and stepped outside. It wasn't a ghost car, it was a 1970s Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow, midnight blue, polished to a quiet gleam. It didn't belong here among the wild dogwoods and cracked fence posts. It rolled to a stop just off the tree line, where gravel met forest. Then silence. The back door opened slowly, and an old man stepped out. He moved with care, a cane supporting his right side, though his spine was straight for someone his age. He wore a tailored dark overcoat over a gray vest, his silver hair combed neatly. He paused, like a man accustomed to being watched and judged. Cassian's grip on the porch railing tightened. Aloan appeared behind him, her breath catching. "Edward," she whispered. Odden, peering from the window, shifted from confusion to stillness, a recognition that had everything to do with blood. Edward Martian stopped 5 feet from the porch and took off his hat. "I didn't come with lawyers," he said. "And I didn't come with apologies I can't earn." Cassian stepped down slowly, his body a shield without being aggressive. "You came a long way to say something." Edward nodded. "Yes. And perhaps to listen." He looked at Aloan. "You're thinner," he said softly. "I expected that. But you're also unbroken. I wasn't sure I'd see that again." Aloan said nothing, her arms crossed to hold something in. "You watched us," she said finally. "You knew what they were doing to me." "I knew pieces," Edward admitted. "More than I should have allowed, less than I should have stopped." "And Julian?" Edward's face flinched, barely but enough. "My son made choices I didn't approve of," he said. "But he loved you." "I knew that too late." Aloan's throat tightened. "He died alone." "Your name was the last on his lips." That silenced the porch. Edward broke the silence, looking at Odden behind the screen door. "I knew who Odden was the moment I saw him smile." That was Julian's smile and his mother's courage. Odden stepped outside, Rowan watching like a child reading a book whose pages might catch fire. Edward lowered himself onto the porch step, eye level with the boy. "I wasn't there when your father died," he said. "I wasn't there when your mother needed protection. And there isn't a single dollar I've ever earned that can change that." Odden looked at him, steady. "Why now?" he asked, his voice curious, too calm for someone so young. Edward blinked. "Because watching from afar only buys you time, it never buys you forgiveness." Inside, Cassian poured coffee, setting a cup for Edward without a word. Aloan sat beside Odden, her hand on his back. Cassian leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "I got a letter from you once," he said. Edward looked up. "I didn't read it until 2 nights ago." "Then you read it at the right time," Edward replied. Cassian tilted his head. "You want something from us, don't you?" The old man didn't flinch. "Yes, but not in the way you think. I want to give Odden what's his name, his inheritance, his legacy. But I won't take him from this house to do it." Aloan's eyes narrowed. "What's the catch?" "No catch," Edward said. "Just a request." He looked at Cassian again. "I built a life with walls so high I forgot what was on the other side. When Julian died, I was too proud to grieve publicly, too cowardly to stand beside the woman he chose." He looked at Odden. "If this boy is to carry my name someday, I want the man who raised him, truly raised him, to stand beside him." The room fell silent. Rowan broke it. "Does that mean Cassian gets to be like a grandpa, too?" They all looked at her. Edward smiled faintly. "Perhaps it does, little one." That night, the Rolls-Royce stayed parked by the trees. Edward slept in a guest room, no security, no driver, just him and a suitcase. Aloan stood on the porch with Cassian, arms folded against the chill. "You believe him?" she asked. Cassian thought for a long time. "I believe regret can grow slowly, but it grows." She looked down. "Part of me wants to forgive him, and part of me wants to let him rot." Cassian smiled without mirth. "Sounds like you're human." She turned toward him. "You think Odden should go with him?" "No," he said. "But I think Odden should know him. And if he's going to inherit a kingdom, he should do it from a cabin where he learned how to use his hands." Aloan's eyes softened. "You always know the right thing to say." Cassian shrugged. No, I just know what I would have wanted for my boy. She reached for his hand, not romantic, not yet, but something passed in that touch, trust, and the first roots of something more. Chapter 8, The Choice. The fire crackled low as Odden sat alone in the living room, Kip curled under one arm, his small figure swallowed by Cassian's old leather armchair. His eyes were fixed on the flames, but his thoughts were far from their flicker. He hadn't said much since Edward arrived, not when the man apologized, not when he offered gifts or legacy or name, not even when Aloan knelt beside him that evening and said, "Whatever you choose, I'm proud of you." That was the problem. He didn't know how to choose. He didn't know what made someone a father, a family, a home. But he knew what it felt like, and that mattered more. Outside, Cassian split firewood methodically, the dull thunk of the axe breaking the silence of the morning fog. The trees stood tall and wet with mist, steam rising like smoke from the log's split centers. He liked the physicality of it, the honesty. You hit something, it broke clean. No lies, no politics, no bloodline complications, just cause and effect. Inside, Edward sat at the table, sipping strong black coffee with the posture of someone not used to waiting. But today, he was learning patience. He watched Odden move through the room, fixing the uneven drawer of Cassian's workbench without being asked, redrawing the lines on Cassian's map of the mountain trails where erosion had changed the river bend. It wasn't the boy's intelligence that struck Edward most, it was his quiet certainty, a certainty not bred in boardrooms or polished over fine china dinners. Cassian came back inside, wiping sweat from his neck with a rag. His gaze swept the room and landed on Edward. "Looks like the boy's been watching you," Edward said mildly. Cassian tossed the rag onto the chair. "He's observant." Edward looked at Odden, now thumbing through a book on solar circuits. "And he's listening, even if he doesn't say much." Aloan entered, carrying 2 mugs of chamomile tea. She handed one to Cassian, the other to Edward, her eyes unreadable. Edward accepted with a nod. "Thank you." She didn't reply. Rowan came tumbling down the hallway, hair wild, cheeks pink from sleep. She ran to Cassian and hugged his leg. "You promised pancakes today," she mumbled into his jeans. "I did," he said, ruffling her hair. "Pancakes coming right up." Edward watched as Rowan danced off toward the kitchen. "She's fearless." Cassian smiled faintly. She was born during a snowstorm, spent the first night of her life by a fireplace. She came into the world fighting. "I like her," Edward said simply. "You'd better," Aloan murmured. "She runs this place." When breakfast was done and the dishes were drying, Odden finally spoke. He stood in the center of the room, back straight, eyes level with Edward's. "If I take your name," he began, "does it mean I lose the one I already have?" Edward set down his mug. "No, it just means the world might call you by something different." Odden nodded. "If I live in your house next, does it mean I leave this one?" Edward paused. "It doesn't have to. You could have both." Odden glanced at Cassian and Aloan. "What if I don't want both?" The room stilled. Cassian shifted, but didn't interrupt. Edward leaned forward slowly. "Then I will respect whatever you choose." The boy was silent, the silence longer than most adults could bear. "Then I want to stay here, with Cassian, with Mom, with Rowan. I want to wake up in this cabin. I want to fix broken things and climb trees and build things that aren't just for selling." Edward nodded slowly. "All right." Odden continued, "If I do ever carry the Martian name, it will be because I earn it, not because someone gave it to me like a crown." Cassian felt something shift in his chest, not pride, not relief, something deeper, almost sacred. He looked at Aloan, who had turned away, wiping her eyes silently. Edward sat back, looking smaller, not defeated, not disappointed, just older, quieter. "Odden," he said gently, "if your father were alive, I think he'd say the same." The boy looked down at Kip, now held in both hands. "He died before I could remember him. But I think I still feel him sometimes, in my hands, in my questions." Edward reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't open it, just placed it on the table. "This was Julian's," he said. "His father gave it to him when he graduated MIT. He never wore it, said it made him feel trapped. Odden picked up the box and opened it. Inside was a simple silver ring, unmarked, understated. Cassian leaned in slightly. You don't have to take it. Odden looked at them all. I want to, he said, but not as a symbol, as a reminder that I came from somewhere. But I belong here. That night, Edward stayed silent by the fire, eyes distant. He left in the morning, no ceremony, no promises, just a nod, a quiet thank you, and a single line to Cassian at the edge of the gravel drive: you saved more than a boy here. You saved a name. Chapter 9, Standing Still. The mornings were colder now, the sun taking its time climbing over the ridge, casting long shadows between the pines. Frost kissed the grass beyond the porch, glittering like spilled sugar before melting under autumn's slow breath. Inside the cabin, the air was warm, but the silence between Cassian and Aloan had stretched thin, not tension, but the awareness of something becoming. Aloan folded laundry on the cedar chest, her left arm finally out of the brace. She moved slower than before, but with more certainty, her presence no longer shrinking. Cassian watched from the kitchen, one hand around a mug of coffee, the other smoothing creases in a dish towel he wasn't drying. She looked up, their eyes met, and neither looked away. That afternoon, Aloan told Rowan and Odden she needed to go to the courthouse. Cassian drove. The truck was quiet but not awkward. Aloan sat beside him, her hands in her lap, fingers laced tightly. The closer they got to town, the tighter they became. Cassian glanced sideways but said nothing. The courthouse was a red brick building with white columns, too proud for its age, too small for its pride. Aloan took one look and nearly turned around. Cassian touched her hand. You're not alone. She nodded, swallowed hard, and walked up the steps. Inside, they filed the paperwork. She requested a formal hearing to contest the false accusations her in-laws had left hanging like a noose. The clerk blinked, surprised by the name, Julian Martian's widow. The woman who had vanished. Aloan stood straighter. Cassian's presence beside her filled the room like armor. When it was over, they stepped into the crisp afternoon, the courthouse doors closing behind them like the end of a long-held breath. They didn't speak until they were halfway down the ridge road. I thought I'd fall apart in there, she said quietly. You didn't. I almost did. But you didn't, he repeated. Aloan looked out the window, watching the treetops blur past. I think I was always waiting for someone to stand next to me when I did something hard. And now, she turned to him. You didn't just stand next to me, Cassian. You stood with me. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. His hand rested briefly on hers, nothing urgent, just solid, present. She didn't pull away. That evening, Rowan and Odden built a telescope from PVC pipe and a cracked magnifying lens. Cassian read aloud from A Wrinkle in Time, his voice low and deliberate, the kids listening wide-eyed by the fire. Aloan sat beside him, curled into the couch. She didn't follow the words, she followed him, the cadence of his breath, the curve of his lips as he softened the consonants for Rowan's sake, the way his voice deepened when the story called for awe. She realized she wasn't just surviving, she was watching a man love a room without saying it. After the kids were asleep, she stayed on the porch, wrapped in a blanket. Cassian joined her, a cup of hot tea in one hand, a silence that wasn't empty. I almost left, she said after a long time. That first night here, when I woke up and realized where I was, who you were, that it was safe. He raised an eyebrow. Safe made you want to leave? Yes, she said, because I didn't know what to do with it anymore. He nodded slowly. I understand that more than I wish I did. She looked over. Do you ever wish you'd left? Every day I stayed after Caleb died felt like a betrayal of how broken I was, he said. But leaving would have been a betrayal of the part of me that still hoped. Aloan stared at him, moonlight softening the hard angles of his face. Cassian, she said, voice trembling, I don't know what this is between us, but I feel it, and it scares me. Because I didn't come here to fall in love. I came here to survive. He set the mug down. Then let's not name it, he said. Let's not try to call it love or timing or fate. Let's just agree that something stayed, even when everything else left. Her eyes welled. She leaned forward slowly, cautiously, and pressed her forehead to his. His hand came up, rough and warm, cradling the back of her head. They didn't kiss, not yet. But something passed between them, more intimate than lips, the kind of closeness that doesn't demand anything except truth. Chapter 10: The School of Wonder. The ribbon was a formality. Odden had insisted on real scissors, not the red plastic ones. "This is important," he'd said seriously. Rowan held the ribbon taut, her tongue peeking out in concentration, while Aloan stood behind them, trying not to cry. Cassian stood at the center, slightly bewildered but deeply proud, a hammer still in his back pocket, sawdust on his boots. They were opening the school that morning, their school. It didn't have a name yet. Cassian suggested Ridge Hollow Learning Center, Rowan wanted Rainbow Unicorn School for smart kids and scientists, and Odden proposed the Wolfheart School for wonder. The sign wasn't painted, so for now, it simply said, "Welcome." The point was what stood behind them, a reclaimed barn with windows catching the morning sun, a wood stove at the center, shelves lined with donated books, desks built from old doors, mismatched chairs, solar panels on the roof, tools in the shed, a cracked globe by the fireplace, and a blackboard, because every real school needed a blackboard. It had started with a letter, not from Edward, but from someone he'd reached out to, a retired superintendent, disenchanted by bureaucracy, looking for a second act. When she visited and saw what Odden had built from scrap wire and cardboard, she'd said, "This is a better start than most million-dollar charter schools I've seen." She'd left with a handshake and returned with state forms, grant suggestions, and a list of families whose kids had dropped out during the pandemic and never returned. "We could give them something," Cassian had said to Aloan one night. "No," she replied. "You already did. We're just making it official." On the morning of the ribbon cutting, the neighbors came. The mailman brought lemonade, Mrs. Albright baked 6 loaves of banana bread, someone brought a fiddle, someone brought tears. Most brought their presents, an unspoken testimony to what they'd watched bloom from the ashes of something broken. Odden gave a short speech, unrehearsed, hushing the crowd to a breathless stillness. "I used to think I didn't belong anywhere," he said, "that being smart made me weird, that having no dad made me half a person. But then I came here, and I learned something important." He looked at Cassian. "Family isn't about blood. It's about who stays." Later, after the laughter faded into the rustling trees, Cassian sat on the porch steps, a cold drink in one hand, his boots dusty from last-minute repairs. Aloan settled beside him, a book under her arm, a quiet smile on her lips. "You know," she said, "when I first arrived here, I thought you were a little strange." He chuckled. "That's generous. You didn't ask questions. You didn't try to fix me. You just made space." He looked out over the clearing, where Rowan and Odden chased each other with paper kites made from grocery bags. "I've learned," he said softly, "that people don't always need answers. Sometimes they just need somewhere to be." She laid the book down. "Do you ever miss the world?" "Which one?" "The loud one, with city lights and deadlines and noise." He shook his head. "I miss the people who used to live in it with me, but not the world itself." She nodded, absorbing that. Then, without looking at him, "I'm not afraid of quiet anymore." He turned to her, studying her face, the faint smile, the way the light caught her cheekbone, the steady beat of peace in her breath. "I think I was waiting for you," he said simply. Aloan turned, eyes soft and certain. "And I think I was waiting for a place like this. A man like you." The kiss that followed wasn't rushed or dramatic, it was steady, like rain on parched earth, like 2 rivers choosing the same path. Chapter 11: The Road Revisited. The road hadn't changed, same winding bend through the cottonwoods, same gravel crackling under the tires, same open stretch of sky, impossibly wide in autumn. But everything else was different. Cassian slowed the truck to a crawl, the morning sun filtering through the trees, painting gold onto the windshield. Aloan sat beside him, her hand resting lightly on his. Rowan and Odden were in the back seat, half asleep, heads resting against each other like born siblings. They hadn't spoken yet, they didn't need to. This was a pilgrimage, a circle closing. Cassian stopped at the edge of the ditch, the spot where it had started. The leaves were thicker now, blanketing the ground in burnt orange and amber, but the contours were the same, the slope where Aloan had lain, broken and unconscious, the patch of grass where Odden had stood, waving in silent desperation. Cassian stepped out first, then Aloan. They walked slowly, like approaching a sacred place. "Right there," Aloan said softly, her voice catching. "That's where I collapsed." Cassian nodded. "And Odden was about 10 feet that way. I almost didn't see him in time." They stood in silence, the breeze threading through the branches above. Odden joined them, holding Rowan's hand. She whispered something to him, then let go. Odden knelt on the ground, not to mourn, to remember. He pulled a wooden stake from his coat pocket and drove it into the soil. Rowan helped him hang the sign, hand-carved, etched with care. Here, someone stopped, and everything changed. They didn't linger, it wasn't a place for weeping anymore, but for honor, for quiet gratitude. Back in the truck, Aloan took Cassian's hand. "I never told you," she said softly, "what I prayed that day before I passed out." He glanced over, letting her speak. "I didn't pray to be saved. I didn't even pray to live. I just said, let him be okay." Cassian squeezed her fingers. "He is." She smiled. "And so am I." Chapter 12, A Home Built on Storms. Weeks later, the cabin was quieter, the school closed for winter break. Snow had come early, blanketing the ridge in white. Cassian had built a sled from old fence rails, and the kids spent the afternoon racing down the slope behind the tool shed. That night, they sat by the fire, sipping cocoa. Rowan told ghost stories, Odden explained Newton's third law using marshmallows and a spoon. Aloan curled against Cassian, her head tucked beneath his chin. "You ever think about leaving again?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "I used to think the road took everything from me," she whispered. "But now I think it gave me everything." He kissed the top of her head. "You gave yourself everything," he said. "You're the one who stayed, who fought, who kept moving forward." She looked up at him, eyes shining. "I didn't keep moving," she said. "I fell. You're the one who stopped." And then she whispered the words that had lived between them for months, unspoken but undeniable, "I love you." Cassian didn't hesitate. "I love you, too." They married quietly that spring, nothing fancy, just family, just the clearing. Odden stood as best man, Rowan scattered wildflowers down the aisle. Aloan wore a simple cream-colored dress, a ribbon in her hair the color of the leaves that had cushioned her fall. Cassian read his vows from a folded paper, his voice cracking halfway through. Aloan kissed his hands, then his lips. They had built something stronger than shelter, they had built a home. That summer, the school expanded. New children arrived, parents bringing bread, stories, tears. The barn became a hub for more than learning, a place of remembering, gathering, beginning again. Edward visited often, but never stayed long, sitting on the porch with Cassian one evening, watching Odden teach Rowan how to balance a compass needle. "He'll be better than all of us," Edward said. Cassian nodded. "He already is." Edward smiled faintly. "You gave him something I never could." Cassian didn't respond. They both knew what he meant. Years later, Odden would return to that road as a man. He'd kneel before the sign he'd carved and run his fingers across the words, "Here," someone stopped, and everything changed. And he'd whisper, just loud enough for the trees to hear, "Thank you, Dad." If this story touched something deep in you, we'd love to know. Tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from today? It's always a joy to see how far stories of love and kindness can travel. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories that remind us of the good still left in the world, feel free to subscribe. We'd be honored to share the next one with you. From our hearts to yours, thank you for spending your time with us. It truly means more than you know.